Have you ever wondered why some kids that seem really bright just seem to have these big emotional meltdowns and it feels like it's over nothing? I want to talk today about what the difference is between being gifted and being smart so that we can try to understand where these big emotions come from. My name's Emily Yee. I'm a therapist and I specialize in working with gifted teenagers and their families. Okay, so the core difference between a gifted kid and just a smart kid is that level, that bell curve of intelligence. So last video we were talking about, and I'm going to draw it just around myself, that the top of my head is the typical kid. And if you are somewhere between 100, 130 IQ of very bright, very quick intelligence, and able to understand things, you will work really well in a structured environment and you're able to keep your emotions regulated. That is the best of both worlds. Once we get past that 130 IQ, we start to really enter into this new territory where we are very deep thinkers, very quick thinkers, and feel things very deeply. And so we're moving outside of the norm in terms of emotional expression and feeling and regulation. And this is where we have big emotional outbursts, hang-ups on things that just don't make sense to typical brains, and a real difficulty regulating their emotion in a world that doesn't have the same intensity as they do. There's a lot of metaphors that I'll be trying to introduce just to keep us understanding what this means. But one is that a gifted brain is like a roller coaster through the mountains. Very unexpected twists and turns, very beautiful, very intense, captivating, sometimes terrifying. And so this is what we're dealing with when we're working with somebody who's gifted. Often parents will say, well, my kid's not gifted. They don't get straight A's. Or they're gifted and I don't understand why they're failing. They could do this in their sleep. And so this is an area that's not very well understood. And what we know about it is that if kids are bored and not stimulated, then they lose motivation and they have no desire to participate. If they are able, they're interested and they're available and they're there, but they just get off task sometimes. They really get into their deep learning and they don't finish what they need to. The boring stuff they just can't get done, or they're disorganized. They don't have the ability to get started. Even though they really, really, really want to get straight A's and make you happy, they struggle in some areas that are unidentified. And this is very common textbook gifted behavior. So giftedness isn't just limited to intellectual and school learning. It doesn't just mean, oh, they're going to read really fast and do their math really well. It's an understanding of an existence in the world. And part of the way we've defined giftedness is understanding the 5 overexcitabilities that can be present. So one is intellectual overexcitability, and that's what we've been talking about with the intelligence measures and reading and writing and really deep learning intellectually, asking a million questions, wanting to go deep about everything. And then we have emotional overexcitability. And I like to think of that as like a very deep well, and they can feel a lot of feelings very deeply, a lot of empathy, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of joy. Just the person that you think of as being too extra, but they're not even trying, it's just who they are. That emotional overexcitability, the capacity to feel beyond what the typical person could do. And then we have sensual overexcitability, so that's wanting more stimulation and sensory experiences or wanting to avoid them in general. And that can look like socks causing a big meltdown, or noises, loud noises, cheering, wanting more stimulation. So wanting to wrestle all the time, biting, or jumping on the trampoline, running into walls, needing that deep pressure. And then we have psychomotor overexcitability, which is the need to move and to know where everything is all around you, and just really knowing where you are in space, and sometimes needing to move in order to think. Imaginational overexcitability. And that's really having a strong imagination. Those kind of kids can get so in their imagination that they really have a hard time breaking out of it. They'll talk to you in character and talk to you like you are a character, and be frustrated that you won't just play along, because that's very much so a part of their reality, but they're not experiencing psychosis. It's just that they love intertwining their imagination, and it's really strong for them. They have the capacity to really use that muscle. And so all of these intensities play into how they experience the world, not just their performance in an educational setting. So some red flags or dead giveaways, I guess, of these intense kids is having, and it can be other things, but sometimes if you see all of these things together, it might be a given that they're avoiding doing homework or refusing to do it because it's boring or repetitive, or they already know it and they truly do. They don't like scary scenes in Disney movies or, sad scenes. They'll become really overwhelmed and emotional when watching movies and avoid it. They sometimes have really big separation anxiety or difficulty putting themselves to sleep or sleeping alone. They can argue with the best of them at a very young age and sometimes make you feel like you're crazy because they're often right. And sometimes they often overthink social situations and kind of feel outcasted by peers. So those are some of the ways that we can spot giftedness. That's not an academic testing. It's these overexcitabilities, these very deep capacities and tendencies to feel differently than the typical. Another giveaway that I look for in my work is existential crises at 8 years old. In our field, in the psychology field, we lean on Erik Erikson's theory of development, which goes through the childhood stages that we all go through, 0 to 2 and then 2 to 4. And by this point, we're at these places in our social and emotional development. There's another theory, the Dabrowski's theory of development, is that you go through, as a gifted person, all of that development that Erik Erikson would mention by the time you're 8 years old. And then there's this idea of positive disintegration, that you feel like the world falls apart around you, whether it's a crisis of faith, an existential crisis of what is the point, just something. There's a moment where it's like, what is the point here? And then you fall apart and you come back together stronger, and self-actualization happens, and then it happens again and again and again. So a gifted person is going through this process very often, whereas a typical person will go through this process later on in life, midlife about, and wondering, what is the point? Am I on track? What am I doing here? A kid that is gifted, depending on the intensity of their giftedness, has these experiences at a young age. And that's another sign to therapists or to educators that you're dealing with a mind that just experiences the world as if the volume is turned up. Their thoughts are turned up. Everything around them is turned up. What they're learning, their emotions are turned up. And they just are experiencing it at a more intense level. And there's things that we can do to help them. Being willing to really listen to them when they're saying this. Why are we learning this? Why am I having to practice this if I already understand it? Considering their logic and being open and flexible with the way that you're teaching and how you're approaching it, and considering if they do know the information, giving them meaningful work to really learn and have a life experience that makes sense to them and to their mind. When you are working with a gifted kid and they're really struggling with getting started on something, or with perfectionism, or just avoiding a task altogether, you might wonder, what is going on there? Do they need more support? Is there a sensory issue? Do they need, and if it's as simple as headphones or earplugs or a weighted blanket, and then they're able to learn, being willing to provide that support to them so that they aren't distracted by that discomfort, and so that they understand themselves, that it's not a matter of them being lazy or defiant, but that their brains and their bodies have different needs. For parents, this is very difficult when we have the asynchronous development and they're 15 in their problem-solving skills and their vocabulary, but they're 5 in terms of their emotional capacity and their ability to regulate their emotions. And so being able to support them in these ways, providing options, getting creative with how you approach it, and being really careful about comparing your child to a neurotypical child. There's going to be some differences in how you approach parenting them because these kids are unique. Every kid is unique. And being willing to try things and experiment and see what works for them. So a metaphor for this is that gifted kids are like race bikes, motorbikes, with bicycle brakes. And so their intellect is just zooming and getting them going, but their emotion regulation is not prepared for that. And we are there to help with the emotion regulation and support the intellect and not shame them for this difficulty regulating their emotions, but validate that these emotions are very intense and very difficult to regulate, but that you're there to help. So having them in therapy is always helpful, just to have somebody on your team, have somebody patient with them, and giving them new ideas when everybody's feeling burnt out. If you are enjoying listening to this, I would love for your subscription and to like it. And if you'd like to work together, you can find my link in the information below and reach out to me, and I'd love to chat with you. Talk to you soon.